forward. So
Okay.
I'll turn it over to Roberto.
Alrighty. Hi everyone, thank you for having me. Yeah, so I will jump right into it. So right off the bat, the pilot was 16 months in total. In that, we had over 91,000 trips taken and 25,000 unique users in Lincoln. Overall, I'd say that shows that there is demand for this mode of transportation here in Lincoln, especially given that this pilot was started during COVID, the peak of it. So all good signs there. The most, I guess, other things to note, most popular day and time was the evenings and the weekends. So yeah, I'm stuttering now, sorry. Moving on to the next
Like
one.
Friday and Saturday nights, or like all evenings you saw a peak, or?
So specifically the weekend, so Friday
Okay.
through, well, I guess Friday and Saturday specifically.
Okay.
In the evenings.
Cool.
So with this, and recognizing that Lincoln has a climate action plan, I kind of wanted to include a little piece on the scooter's environmental impact. So I kind of mirrored some of the stuff that the city of Portland, Oregon has done, as well as Seattle, with how they're analyzing the environmental impact for scooters. And the big piece with this, they use, through user surveys, gauge what the percentage is of users that said that this replaced a car trip or an Uber or Lyft, and then using that percentage to calculate the amount of car
As
trip.
opposed to walking. for
Correct.
example. Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
So of that, we had 10.7 metric tons of CO2 emissions saved, and that is about the same thing as one vehicle commuting 224 times from here to Omaha and back. So thought it was pretty neat. Obviously, there are other components to it that Portland and Seattle are still investigating, that being when you create the scooter and the environmental impact
Oh, at the front end.
before.
Okay.
Correct, yeah.
That's detailed. Okay.
So with this scooter pilot, I in my analysis of other municipalities and what they're doing, I noticed that Milwaukee, for example, was having some e-scooter observations, just to get a better sense of what users are doing and what that behavior looks like. Data can only tell you so much, so it makes sense for someone to be out there to kind of just gauge how things are going. So over the summer of 2021, I went out and about to 6 different locations here in downtown Lincoln, and did some observations. So the 6 specific locations were 8th and P, 8th and R, Canopy and P, 14th and R, and then I'm missing one. I think it was 11th and P. So all of these locations were chosen because our third-party mobility manager, Populous, indicated that these spaces were the highest for parking your scooter or for checking out a scooter and going on with your trip. So with that, observation showed 70% or so were riding in the street, with close to 30% of those riding in the sidewalk, or on the sidewalk rather. And one thing I did want to note with this, the small percentage of improperly parked e-scooters that I observed in these locations, part of that reason was after the 6-month pilot and the mid-year scooter pilot report, we had a recommendation in there to implement some designated e-scooter parking locations, specifically targeting the Haymarket area. And after having that piece implemented, we did see a decline in the amount of improperly parked e-scooters in that busy area, as well as a decline in the amount of emails, calls, uplink comments that I received specifically from that location. So with regards to injuries and crashes, of the 91,400 trips taken, LPD received 4 medical calls, and we had 1 documented crash between a motorized vehicle and an e-scooter. And LPD also received 30 total miscellaneous calls for service pertaining to e-scooters.
Can I ask a question on that?
Yes.
Was there any data collected from the hospitals, like if they, if someone didn't call LPD but instead took themselves to like Bryan West or whatever and said that they crashed on their scooter, did the hospitals collect any data on that?
As far as I'm aware, no. I know there were conversations previously when this whole pilot was coming to be of having some coordination there, but
Just never went down?
No, and I think one of the difficulties was whether or not it was a city-owned versus a private-owned, because obviously there's private-owned scooters out there as well. It was one that was too difficult, I think, to really gauge and get that accurate data.
And I apologize if you presented this already. Were there how many claims were, I guess, filed with the city of Lincoln for injuries on a e-scooter?
There was 1 tort claim filed, and that was for an individual who, a young individual under the age of 18. So our scooters, you're supposed to be over the age of 18. But this individual, someone over the age of 18, got her the scooter. She was riding on the sidewalk. She did collide with another female pedestrian who did fall, and the council did hear that tort claim.
Okay.
That's the only tort claim that's come about from the e-scooters.
But the tort claim was the injured pedestrian.
It was the injured pedestrian. I believe it was a broken hip
Yeah.
Mhm.
on that one.
Yeah.
Very early, wasn't it not? Yeah.
It was, yeah.
Roberto, how do you know of other sort of ratios of accidents or collisions or what have you with number of users or trips or whatever, and how Lincoln might fall in comparison to other communities? I know that this is a pilot program, so it's early on. People are in the community are just getting used to the product and how it works and what have you. But I didn't know if you knew if these stats kind of fell in line with what other communities experienced, or were higher or lower. You had feedback there.
yeah, I don't have the comparisons with other cities on that aspect. So I don't feel comfortable speaking
Sure.
on that
Okay.
at the moment.
Okay.
One other, if I may.
Yes.
On the miscellaneous calls, I don't know if you know, but would those be to LPD mostly about parking on the sidewalks, or do you have a feeling for what those might be in general?
Yeah.
Or maybe you're getting to that later.
I don't specifically call out the miscellaneous calls in this PowerPoint. I do have that though.
Okay,
It
That's
did
fine.
involve calls
okay.
for improperly parked, or just someone not liking that an e-scooter was in the area, anything and everything. The one thing with those miscellaneous calls that LPD made note of is it doesn't specify between a privately owned e-scooter and a city-sponsored e-scooter. It's just an e-scooter that gets called in.
Okay. Do you want us to hold our questions to the end? Would that
No,
be helpful?
Whatever works is fine
Okay.
by me.
There were a number of, I feel like we got 3 or 4 emails last summer from people saying, motorists saying e-scooters are in the way.
Mhm.
I just remember, I passed a couple to Director Elliott, but I remember there being a
Yeah.
very small number.
With this pilot, we also conducted a user survey to kind of get a sense of what the public was feeling with regards to these. And some of the big findings that we found there, 59% were very supportive of the pilot continuing as is. 88% of users said they were familiar or somewhat familiar with the local operating and parking rules for City of Lincoln. 39% of users said that they most often rode on the sidewalk. This one stood out to me, and kind of relates to the last point I have there, where only 45% of users said they felt very safe or safe when riding an e-scooter. And I would attribute that a little bit to just not having as much on-street bike facility infrastructure within the small pilot area at the time. And also just more education or knowing how to navigate with these scooters from the motorist perspective. One instance in particular, I was riding one of the e-scooters on the bike lane on 14th Street, and a motorist told me to get out of the road, which I was in a bike lane, but so there's definitely room for further education on all road users there. So from, I guess, safety education, I kind of touched on it already, but the e-scooter companies were, the relationship that we established with them was a good one, in that they didn't get annoyed of all the questions, comments, concerns that I would bring up, or Liz or Dan. And they were receptive to a lot of the feedback that we were giving them. And with that meant a lot of tailoring messaging within the app specific to our needs and wants. So for a while it was, reminding users where they are legally allowed to ride an e-scooter. And then for a little while, maybe a month or so, we had a couple instances of parents letting their kids ride on the e-scooter with them. So we tailored the messaging to remind individuals that you're meant to be 18 years or older, and only one scooter user is allowed on a scooter at a time. In addition to that, Spin provided some A-frames that were placed throughout the Haymarket area, our busiest area for e-scooters, again reiterating that message that scooters are meant to be on the road and not on the sidewalks in the Haymarket area, or I guess the entire operating area. So from the city end, we went ahead and created the Scooterlink website. That was one of our first action items that we took. Within this website, we have everything from the rules for operating and parking, a quick YouTube video with the top 6 safety tips needed when operating a scooter, as well as the contact information for both Bird and Spin were on there. And a frequently asked questions section was also in there.
There's you.
Yeah. We also did a social media push from our end, so worked exclusively with LTU Communications and putting together some social media stuff to push out here and there, just again reiterating and reminding users of the do's and don'ts of using e-scooters here in Lincoln. We also created some signage and placed it around the Haymarket and some in the downtown area, strategically placed where we saw higher amounts of scooters being parked or scooters being rented from. And this again was to remind users that sidewalk riding is not allowed. And we also included bicycles, since we do have a city ordinance on certain sections that bikes can't be on the sidewalks either. And then the other piece we had, we hosted 3 safety educational events with both Bird and Spin. BikeLink was also present at these to make it more of a shared micromobility event. And at these events, we let anyone that was curious about e-scooters try one out, learn more about the operating rules, and we also gave out free helmets. We definitely gave out more than 200 helmets, both from Bird and Spin.
And my socks.
Yeah.
So,
Wow.
Oh, no.
Yeah, the spin socks are pretty cool.
Yeah, pretty orange.
Yeah. So current recommendations based on the scooter pilot, would like to transition from a pilot to a long-term shared micromobility program. Introduce revisions to e-scooter related municipal code to reflect kind of recommendations that we're talking about right now. Also introduce municipal code language specific to privately owned e-scooters. There was definitely an uptick in the amount of privately owned e-scooters that people saw out and about, and definitely some of the feedback that we received was pertaining to privately owned. So definitely having something in place for that. In addition, like to create a new request for qualifications to get new e-scooter companies here operating in Lincoln, as well as reviewing and revising the existing terms and conditions of the e-scooter pilot, and then also expanding the operating area to include more of the residential neighborhoods south and east of downtown. Really, what's meant here is we want this to be a valid mode of transportation for all Lincoln residents, so being able to expand it outside of that, small operating area that we started with, I think makes sense. And this would also tie back into kind of the environmental impact of it, where if we have scooters available to those that live a little further south of what the operating area was, they may be more inclined to use that mode of transportation as opposed to driving their vehicle by themselves to get to the parking lot or what have you.
So the current boundaries are that darker brown
Yes.
there, and then that kind of gold brown, light brown, that would be the new expanded.
boundary. Okay.
It would be, so down to South Street and over to 27th. Still having the geofencing off the university, the Capitol area, and anything farther east of that
Right.
27th
And
line.
geofencing is whatever else needs to come up that needs to be geofenced is a quick emailing letting them know this needs to be implemented.
Yeah, Heather. You have a lot of other
are you-
asks,
Oh!
because we're gonna have some questions, I think.
Yeah, okay. Require percentage of e-scooters to be deployed in identified zones. So that's, again, being able to provide e-scooters for all Lincoln residents, not necessarily just University of Lincoln or Nebraska students, as well as increasing the awareness around low-income discounts that some of the programs, Bird, Spin, other scooter companies have. And then another item is evaluating a requirement for e-scooter devices to have contact information in Braille. This is something that Chicago had as a requirement for their e-scooters. This is also something that came up from the blind community as far as if I'm walking and I happen to have an e-scooter nearby, how am I able to contact them? So that was something that I noticed another city was doing and something to consider. So many, I'm sorry. So again, the impact of the designated e-scooter parking locations were a good one. So I think it only makes sense to identify and create additional designated e-scooter parking locations across the operating area. Continue the e-scooter observations from our end to evaluate user behavior, and then continue to educate and push out our messaging through all available channels, whether it be the scooter companies themselves, or website, or social media avenues. And then that just goes deeper into the proposed municipal code changes.
Biggest ordinance change, right now we have up to 3 operators. This new proposed ordinance would be 2, no more than 2 operators, and that they're 1-year permits is, and then the other big ordinance change is changing the terminology right now, an e-scooter is considered a motorized vehicle. That causes some confusions with DUI laws and some other complications, so that is now going to be changed, or the recommendation is to change it to a transportation device. That's the other big one. The other one is just making the policies and stuff more consistent with bikes, so the sidewalks, where they're allowed, where they're not allowed, those types of things. These are still not going to be permitted at this time on bike trails. They could do on-street bike facilities, but not bike trails. There is some question with federal funding and whether or not that impacts it, so we're just going to stay away from that. The one good thing is if we make this a permanent program, the companies are more likely, and we would require this in the RFQs and in the permitting, to give us the best technology out there. With that best technology out there, that does allow for some additional geofencing, parking requirements. So let's say someday we do get on a bike trail, we can say your trips cannot end within this area. And if they happen to lay down on a trail, the charge would keep going. So it would encourage them to park in the designated parking locations. So that is one benefit of having this a permanent program, is we can get the best technology that would allow us to manage these even better than they are now.
Thank you for the great presentation, and you read my mind on bike trails and federal funding.
Yes.
Because I'm very familiar with that, and that's a fight for somebody else at a
Yes,
different level.
it is. That's
than-
not
than
something we
the
want to
city of
tackle.
Lincoln. But I was looking at the proposed area you had, and I saw that it was moving to the east, sort of northeast, and I was wondering if it went as far as East Campus, or, because I'm just sort of thinking, I'm curious what the relationship with the university has been over the course of this, whether or not we'd be looking at zones like that include East Campus, or the campus area around Wesleyan, or College View. So I'm just sort of curious how we might be able to extend this kind of benefit or service to a population area where people might be most interested.
Sure, yeah. So the relationship with UNL has been a good one. We had bi-weekly check-in meetings with city staff and partners, and UNL was one of them. They have been receptive to having designated scooter parking locations in the perimeter. We know that e-scooters are not allowed on their widened sidewalks. So at least having the ability to park the scooters prior to getting on campus is a good one. You're correct in that this operating or proposed operating area would extend out to East Campus. Our thought being having the ability to use an e-scooter to get from both potentially, as well as capturing some of that residential area where UNL students live, or families, or what have you.
If we get to the point where we might have more than 2 operators apply for a permit, how do you anticipate handling that process?
So if we we would go out for an RFQ, and we would do it based on our kind of typical RFQ process, where we would score and take the 2 highest scores. If we do decide down the road that we would like more than 2, that would require an ordinance change, because that is in the ordinance.
Richard?
You know how much I like this program. I
Yes.
always have, and was pushing for it. I know, talking with one of the operators, or a couple of the operators, I really appreciate the working relationship they have with the city. They've been very happy with the way the city, very complimentary for you, and how working relationships, because sometimes I can get a little tense when you get the call that this scooter is laying on its side in somebody's yard somewhere. Gotta go get it, but I think they worked hard at it. I do like your idea of the quality of the equipment. We should be having the updated equipment, and if we can get that, that'd be great. I think that makes a difference for the riders. The timing of the license, are we gonna allow them year-round? Would this be a 12-month license that they could have it year-round?
It would be once we go through the next RFQ process. So realistically, we're probably looking at May-ish, probably. By the time this goes for vote on the 21st, then we do an RFQ, leave that out on the street for a while and close. but it would be a one full calendar year permit, annual permit process.
And talking with them, in their data that they have on what they saw, that this time of year is probably the highest, best time for them. And mostly, I think it's because we got a lot of visitors here.
Right.
We get the boys and states basketball, and these people want to use them. It's more of a recreation type for them, and they get a lot of use out of those. And students, when the weather changes, they like to get out there and use them a lot too. I got a quick question. You said that they cannot operate on bike trails,
Right.
but motorized bikes are allowed on bike trails? They
Af-
can go, what, 35, 45 miles an hour?
The conversations that we've had with parks is, a lot of it is the e-scooters are pretty new, and so the federal codes and rules and guidelines haven't quite caught up to the technology. So it's my understanding from talking to Lynn and his team that there have been some conversations, but nothing's changed, and we definitely do not want to cause any issues for parks and the funding on that. So for right now, and that's something, the stakeholders that Roberto was talking about that meet bi-weekly, they are part of it, and so we're trying to keep the lines of communication as open as possible so everyone's on the same page, and we've got a game plan that works for everyone.
And it's the motorized vehicles, and we'll talk offline, but I'll explain why motorized bikes are allowed, but they have to have titles. If they didn't have titles, they wouldn't be allowed.
Right,
It's
some component of people power or person power is required.
I just want to be mindful of time. It's 1:34, and we still have our chamber friends to come and talk. If there's any further information or questions, reach out to our friends here at LTU. And
Did you already email this to us?
The annual report, but I can email it out again. I can email
No, I can look through my email.
Are you sure?
Thank you.
Okay.
Did you do financial reporting on this? How much did we,
A little over 13,000 is what we
is
brought
what we
in for
collected in
this.
fees?
And
Yes.
user fees, per ride fees.
Per ride fees, correct. And then there's a permit fee as well on
What's
top
the
of
permit
it.
fee?
It was 75,000 per operator for the first period.
75,000?
No.
7,500. I wish it was 75.
How do you make
any money?
That might be how we pay for other things.
Thank you.
thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. Next up, I'd like to invite our chamber friends, and I believe we have a new guest to meet the council. And so, welcome so much, or welcome. Thank you so much for coming, and welcome to Lincoln.
Welcome back.
Welcome back to Lincoln.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, if you want to talk a little bit about yourself and your history and whatnot, but why don't we start off by saying our names in case you don't know who some of the council members are, and talk about if we're an at-large member, if we represent a specific district. And
Sure. Jason, my name is Tom Beckius.
Good
I'm
to
an
see you.
at-large member of the Lincoln City Council. Way back in the day, we had a little bit of interaction. I'm a former chair of YPG.
Yep.
So,
Thank you for that.
Welcome, Jason. I'm Jane Raybold, and I represent the 3rd District, which is the southwest quadrant of the city. And this is my second term on the city council.
Thank you.
Hi, Jason. I'm Richard McGinnis. I represent the Southeast District. Hopefully you can find a house in Southeast Lincoln.
Or anywhere in town. right now.
Anywhere in town.
my name is James Michael Bowers, and I represent Northeast Lincoln.
And Councilman Bowers is chair of the city council, as you probably already know. So Tammy Ward, I represent Northwest Lincoln, all of downtown and central Lincoln, District number 4, 3rd year on the council. Welcome back to Lincoln. Sorry this seems so formal, but thank you for coming over. It's a good
Well,
way to-
I'm the one that showed up in
Well.
the suit today, so
You're a
it's all my
chamber
fault,
exec.
really.
Looking sharp.
Welcome.
I am Benny. I'm one of 3 at-large members of the Lincoln City Council.
Hi, Jason. Welcome again. I'm
Thank you.
Sandra, and member at large.
Thank you so much.
I'm Jamel Wade.
she keeps us in
She
line.
keeps us all in order here.
You're keeping things moving. Thank
She
you very
does.
much. It's very. Did you want me to go ahead?
Yeah, if you want to
Okay.
go ahead and introduce yourself and
Yeah.
we'll
Well,
have a conversation.
members of the council, thank you so much for an opportunity to come speak with you today. This is now week 7 of my barnstorming tour across the city to meet with as many people as quickly as possible. And so I have been very much looking forward to the conversation today and look forward to learning from you all as I get more plugged in the community. I have the great honor to be the new president and CEO of your Lincoln Chamber of Commerce and the Lincoln Partnership for Economic Development. I will go into more of my background in a moment, but the partnership between the city and the Chamber's set of programming was one of the first things that I had asked about when looking at returning to town, and have been so pleased to see that we have so many nodes of connection, areas of real productive relationship and partnership, whether that be on policy, certainly for economic development and the substantial contract that we work with you all on, or other, I'll put it into the fun community building bucket of things like the community flag that we just celebrated here a couple weeks ago. It is so important, I think, for an effective chamber to be in a very productive place with city leadership at several different levels, whether that be with elected officials like yourselves, certainly the mayor and her team, or city staff. So very much looking forward to continuing those productive relationships with everybody. Just a brief bit of background. I'm a West Nebraska kid. Grew up in Sidney, Nebraska, which is the hometown of Dick and Jim Cabela. And so purely by osmosis and in spite of my best efforts, I at a very early age, began to learn what economic growth meant for communities, how that supported and sustained families, how it gave people opportunities, and had a real great upbringing there. Like a lot of folks in this community, I came here for school at Nebraska Wesleyan first, and then later in graduate school from UNL. So I got 2 great education experiences here in the community. I bopped around a few things. My first career was as a chemist. Thank goodness that was briefly lived for everybody. I needed to be out in front of people and really found my way into technology development, small business development, eventually with the Small Business Development Center when it was at what is now called New Tech Ventures with the university system. And I was working there when this Chamber of Commerce, under then Vice President Jason Smith and Wendy Birdsall as president, approached me about joining their economic development team. Had 5 amazing years with this chamber, loved it, and after 16 years living in Lincoln, had an opportunity to grow my career. That took me to Central Kansas, Sioux Falls, South Dakota, and then had kind of settled down in Central Texas in a community called Round Rock, which is immediately north of the Austin metro, if you will, and had really figured I was going to end my career somewhere in Texas because there's so much going on there. And the thought of coming back really never seemed like an opportunity for me until I got a call from Wendy letting me know that the news was going to be coming out soon that she was getting ready to retire. My wife's family is still in Omaha. We have 2 kids together. My parents are retired and still are in Sydney, and so the idea that we might be able to come back to what is home in our hearts was just an opportunity we couldn't pass up. So I could not be more thrilled to be back in this community and be what I call be a small part of the big story of Lincoln. And so that's a little bit about me. Happy to answer questions on that if you want them, or I can talk about what the rest of 2022 is going to look like for me if you want to hear more about that.
Any questions or comments from the council at this point?
Not at this point, but I would be interested in hearing, Jason, a little bit about what you think, programming-wise, community-wise, what you see going forward for you, and initiatives that you think are important to the Lincoln community, or issues that you just want to think about that maybe you don't know what you want to do on yet. But just what does the future look like, do you think, at this point in time?
I'm glad you mentioned that latter category, council member, because that's the largest category I have, is things I've heard about, but we're still formulating plans on. So there's, as we have also a new LPS superintendent that's going to be making his way into town. I feel like he stole my 90-day plan because I started putting a flag in relationships about the same time he did. You know, I've been very fortunate to go out. I've had about 170 connections with people in the past 6 weeks, just asking questions and listening. And so my first day was on January 24th, and so the first 2 or 3 months are really going to be dominated by just really getting myself in front of people, mostly so I can learn from them and take in as much about what our members, what community members, what business leaders, and what our stakeholders have on their minds about their concerns and opportunities for Lincoln. At the same time, I've been very focused with our board, even going back to the interview process, that it is time for the chamber to reestablish a new strategic plan. We've been, and this is not a criticism of Wendy or any of my predecessors with the chamber, but it's just time. Lincoln, I have learned, is very much at an inflection point where we have accomplished many of the 10 pillars that the 2015 Vision Group had established and talked about. And I think that's to the great credit of this community. That's something to celebrate, that we have done that work. I think there are a few items left on that list that are sort of following through on finishing that swing that was in that original 10 pillars plan. And so we're going to be very active in moving forward on that. And here I'm talking about things like, say, the proposed convention center study, right? You know, but given all that success, I think there are maybe a list of several items that I've heard as some coalescing themes in those discussions, if you will, that business members in our community are very focused on. You know, to rattle off a few, obviously workforce will not surprise anyone in this room, is what businesses are very focused on. Sadly, the chamber cannot wave a wand and create more bodies here, and so we're in the place of how can we either recruit more people to the community or train more folks here in a customized way that will serve the needs of business at the speed that they want to move. Water security, broadly speaking, again, very much on businesses' mind right now, whether that be a second source of water for the city has come up in a lot of those conversations, or certainly in this day and age, we're all focused on how can we better manage and mitigate flood control, for example. And so we think we have some work to do there. Transportation, again, I applaud everybody that helped get the South Bypass in. I was thrilled to see that that's going in. Now the question on that is how do we get utilities and development to that area so that we can receive the benefits from that very significant investment that was made as a community. And we're excited to engage in that conversation, as well as now I get to pester everybody about an East Bypass. And so that will complete our loop. I think that will be important for the long-term growth and health of the community as well. And then just future growth opportunities, site preparation, site development, you know, having a mind to create the right product that will be competitive for what business wants to see if they're going to examine maybe making an investment in Lincoln. And so we have so much to be excited about. I've set a lot of needs in that list. Again, that's what businesses are always focused on, is how can we take where we are now and make it that extra bit better and keep moving forward as a community. But at the same time, people are very enthusiastic and optimistic about what the future of the chamber and of Lincoln as a whole community will be. So, appreciate it.
Any other comments or questions?
I have just a comment.
Councilman Ward?
We know that Chairman, or Councilman McGinnis will come up, but I just have a comment. Oh, come on. No, I just want to commend your staff, Jason. I know that we don't have to tell you that, but beyond even Bruce and Todd, but I've had the pleasure of working with both of them at the chamber, but before that, Bruce and I were legislative staffers about 110 years ago, it seems like, and Todd and I were congressional staffers, but nonetheless, beyond who you have with you today, it's always been easy for me to call the chamber and have assistance or have feedback over the years, and I just want you to know how grateful I've been for that. throughout my career, which has always been public service. So
Yeah.
I'm just grateful that Lincoln has such a talented and accessible chamber staff. So kudos to you to be able to inherit them, and now that you're back, and we look forward to those continued relationships. So thank you for not upsetting the cart. Not that would happen. but,
I'm doing my best.
so,
Yeah.
Well, they're pretty rowdy.
yeah. Never know where they're coming from. But it's
Okay.
a delight. Absolutely, though.
Council member, in all sincerity, I am so pleased to hear you mention that. Thank you for bringing that up. I also can't say I'm surprised. We hear that in a lot of corners, but I was reminding the team this morning how often it comes up in conversations just like this. I think that's one of the most important functions a chamber can be, is a resource for information to elected officials and other decision makers. And so our door's wide open for those conversations. Please use us and leverage us for those. We do want to be a help.
Well, I think it goes both ways. I know that my colleagues would ask, and I will be quiet so they can, what we can do to assist the chamber as well. Not only huge issues that have come up recently, but in general, how the
Yeah.
city can be of help. And I know that all my colleagues have done that and want to continue to do that, those that have been here longer than myself. So we offer that as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Councilman Washington?
I just wanted to give you an opportunity, if you hadn't touched on it and talking about sort of the future, the big scope of things, to give us any indications what your 2022 looks like.
Well, what I've summarized today is the entirety of my 2022, council member, and I don't mean to be silly in responding that way, but if I'm able to initiate, and I am going to try to complete that strategic plan within the year, that'll be a big swing if I can get it there. Between getting plugged in where I need to and getting the organization aligned along a strategic plan, I will feel like that's a great start. Along the way, just for some more color commentary, we're taking several of what I would call little bets, if you will. So I've started a small business council, and group of advisors to me, because small business is an important part not only of our economy here, but certainly of what the chamber looks like is today. Working with Brooke Zimmerman, our director of communications, she and I have some plans about how we can get the message out, not only about what the chamber is doing, but how we can help our members tell their stories within the community and outside the community. And then, of course, doubling down on our startup programs and innovation economy. Those are central to, I think, where we want to be as a chamber. And so those would be some additional items that I'm going to throw in this year.
Any other questions or comments at this time?
No, thank you, Jason. We appreciate it very much. I've also taken note of your small business advisory committee already, and it's a step in the right direction. And thank you for, I guess, rehiring a YPG coordinator. I think that's on your to-do list, so.
It is.
Thank you for that, too.
Kayla did an excellent job for us. I got to work with her on my first day for 30 whole minutes before she let me know that she was getting ready to move on. I don't know if that speaks extremely poorly of me, but I've chosen to credit that Kayla, after 5 years of doing excellent work for the chamber, had a great opportunity that she could not pass up to grow in her career, which I certainly can't fault any of our team members for. That's the reason I left the chamber, because I had an opportunity to grow in my career. And so very happy to report we've had several first-round interviews and are going to complete, I believe, second-round interviews for that this week. Keep your fingers crossed. I'm hoping that we will have that moving along in the not-too-distant future.
Any other questions or comments? All right. Thank you so much for coming out. It was great to get to know you a little bit more, and look forward to working together over the next couple of years.
Council, thank you so much. Councilmember.
No, we don't need an OPG.
You don't need an OPG.
No.
We'll stand adjourned until 2 o'clock for directors.
All right. Thank you so much.
Ow!
Oh.